Welcome to the NCFCA Online Summit. My name is Amy Joy Tofty, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Director of Education for NCFCA. Since 2001, NCFCA has empowered Christian students to apply and communicate their worldview with skill and clarity. Through regional and national competitions, supported by robust training and curriculum, tens of thousands of students have demonstrated confidence and excellence in communicating truth with grace. To meet your challenge, visit www.ncfca.org. We're so glad that you've joined us for our free online summit. The purpose of this event is to lay a firm foundation and to get you excited about developing communication skills. Today, we'll be focusing on platform speeches. On Tuesday, you can expect to hear about limited preparation speeches. Wednesday will be about interpretations, bringing literature to life. Thursday, we'll focus in on policy debate, and Friday on value debate. And then, if you enjoy your time with us here this week, we invite you to check out the NCFCA Online Intensive from August 3rd through the 7th, where you'll build upon what you've learned here today with live teaching sessions and group breakout activities brought to you by a fantastic team of NCFCA leaders and alumni. Now, the spaces on that event are limited, so visit ncfca.org/intensive for more information. We are so thankful for technology, which allows us to gather together even though we're miles apart, and some of us around the globe. So to our listeners from other continents, we welcome you. We're so glad you're here today. For those of you who are just joining us, let me share a few tips to improve your experience. First, if you're experiencing tech issues, we ask that you email summittech@ncfca.org. So just to make sure that we see those things, if you can direct that to that email address instead of typing those in the chat box or the Q&A box, that would be fantastic. If you have downloaded the Zoom app onto your computer or your mobile device, then you should have access to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Here's what we ask. Please keep all those chats positive and on point. Remember that even chat boxes are a great place to practice communicating in a manner that glorifies God. Now, you'll also notice at the bottom of your screen a Q&A feature. This is for you to ask direct questions to our speaker, and then our speaker and our other panelist guests will answer those during our live Q&A. So keep those really specific to the content that's being presented in this particular session. So in the Psalms, David writes, "Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And we are so glad that God has led us to this place and brought us to this path to learn how we can follow him better. In session 2, structuring your speech, you'll learn how to narrow your topic, how to develop a thesis, and how to organize your ideas so that you can lead your listener along the path of truth. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Andrew Pudewa, a good friend of the NCFCA. Mr. Pudewa is a Region 4 NCFCA parent of 7 children. As the founder and director of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, he travels around the world sharing his insight on teaching, writing, thinking, spelling, and music. So please welcome Mr. Andrew Pudewa. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Amy Joy.
So good to see you again. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, it's a privilege and a pleasure. And hello to the many hundreds. I'm amazed at this size of this event, and it's just so exciting. And I just have to say, yay, Region 4.
For those of you who are new to NCFCA, Region 4 has been split into 2 new regions. so long live Region 4.
Oh, well, the sad thing is all my children are grown up, and I have a 7-year-old grandson who lives nearby, but I'm going to have to wait a few years till I can get back into the going to tournaments part.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks so much for being here today, Andrew.
Sure. My pleasure. The presentation title, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with all of you, is Structuring Your Speech. So this morning you heard, I believe, about getting good ideas for your speech and kind of the pre-writing section, finding where your passion is, what probably interests you enough to get deep into it. And I'm going to be talking then about the next step, which is organizing things. And I'm going to go for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a short break with a giveaway from the sponsor, and then we'll take Q&A. So if you do have some questions, please be sure that you kind of jot them down so you don't forget. At a certain point, you can type them into the Q&A, and then I believe Amy Joy and her team will be facilitating the Q&A at that time. Some of you may have suffered me on video. I don't know, when you were perhaps you know, a bit younger, or maybe now, or maybe it's in your future. I apologize for any of the pain that the structure and style system has caused you, but I would guess deep down in your heart, you know it was helpful and is being helpful. Much of the information today that I'm presenting to you corresponds very closely with the NCFCA published materials. Of course, my name is Andrew Pudewa. I'm the director of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and I am in my office here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in our conference room. So let's get right into it and talk about objectives. So there's platform speeches here we're talking about. There's expository speeches, persuasive speeches. Expository means literally in Latin, those of you who study Latin, to place out, exposit, to place out in front of someone. So your purpose is to teach or edify your audience. Most of the public speaking that I do traveling around during a normal year, traveling around to various conventions and seminars and workshops, falls in this category. I am teaching, trying to edify, trying to inform, to clarify or illuminate so that people leave having a better understanding of something. Or maybe they had a very vague or fuzzy understanding and now they know something about it for the first time. Now, a persuasive speech is a little different. Your objectives are to either change someone's opinion or to inspire someone to action. Now, one of the very first things you ever think about, and I'm sure that you've heard this before, but it's so important, it's always worth reiterating, and that is the first rule of rhetoric, the first rule of speaking: know your audience. In my life, I have different audiences. Some are very different. I often speak to homeschool parents. So I use a particular vocabulary. I use a particular set of examples, a particular style of speaking. Sometimes I'm called to speak to school teachers, people who work in 5-day-a-week regular schools, sometimes even public school teachers. I have to change a little bit my vocabulary. I have to change a little bit the examples I use, the tone. Sometimes I speak to teenagers, so I may change things a little bit depending on the age of the people that I'm speaking to. So when you are starting to think about what do you want to teach, what do you want to illuminate on, or what kind of opinion would you like to either change in case there's you know, a difference of opinion, you want to sway people to yours, or to inspire action in something. For example, I noticed in the chat prior to the beginning of this session that there were some very different opinions on jazz music. So one approach would be to write a speech convincing people that they should or should not listen to jazz music. If you were at a jazz convention talking to people you knew, everyone loves jazz, you would probably try to inspire them to a particular action, such as listen to this type of jazz or be more active in the jazz-loving community, etc. So keep that in mind as we go through everything else here. Know your audience. Of course, the question is, if you're giving a speech at an NCFCA competition, who's your audience? Well, if you've done that before, you know it's likely to be a significant number of parents of other contestants. There's also community judges, and they could come in from anywhere. They could be any age. There's also alumni judges who've been in NCFCA competition and may have done the very thing that you're trying to do, but are now, you know, out of high school, into college or into professional life, and have come back to judge. So in one way, most of your judges are going to be fairly like-minded in terms of their opinions about things, but you may come across some people who are of a completely different persuasion there. So, all right, let's take a look at the ballot, because that is what the judge is looking at. So as they are listening to your speech, looking over, kind of reviewing in their mind the judge orientation they went through, they're going to look and see that there's a section for organization and analysis. And this section for organization and analysis has sub-points. So my presentation here today is based on those sub-points. So let's take a look at them. The first one is, relates a clear thesis. A thesis, essentially, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that is the statement you are making. Jazz is good. That's a thesis. Jazz is bad. That's a thesis. Generally, you would move then to discuss the topic using appropriate analysis and reasoning. So that's the second thing, is analysis and reasoning. What is that? The third thing judges are going to be looking for is this factor: incorporates a strong introduction and conclusion. So we'll be looking at introductions and conclusions today, and how you can make them strong and effective. The fourth thing would be demonstrates a logical, coherent, well-reasoned flow of ideas. And the key word in that sentence is flow. I'm sure you have all heard speakers, maybe even pastors giving sermons or conference talks, or peers who weren't organized, and things kind of jumped around and didn't necessarily connect up. And that was, kind of frustrating. So that flow also relates to the next idea, which is balances the development of each point and incorporates fluid transitions. Notice the connection there. Flow of ideas, fluid transitions. And so when you listen to excellent speeches, when you listen to winning competitors, you will probably see how they move from one excellent point smoothly to another excellent point. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. So starting off with the first one, relates a clear thesis statement. How do we think about that? Well, a thesis statement is essentially a thing that encapsulates or summarizes your entire speech in one sentence. And so sometimes you talk about, the elevator speech. So, if someone were in an elevator and you wanted to say what you do or what you think about something, and you had a very short period of time, from the 5th floor to the 1st floor, what would you say? And so that is essentially your thesis statement. Your thesis statement would lead to an assertion. This is a confident statement of belief which can be supported by research and evidence. So if I want to argue that jazz is the best music to listen to, that is, a thesis. What's my assertion was that you should listen to more jazz because it's the best. So it follows like that. If my thesis is jazz is bad music, then the assertion may be we should avoid listening to jazz and not bring it into our environment. Do you see? So you could go either way with that type of thing. The next idea about a thesis statement is it reasonable in scope and specific in nature. So you don't want that thesis to be too complicated, such as the best way to stay healthy is to be sure and eat lots of garlic and hot peppers and take vitamins and fresh air and drink sparkling water. That's probably too much for a thesis. What would be the thesis is there are some natural ways that you can strengthen your immune system. Assertion would be those are readily available and you can take advantage of it. Then you get into the details. If you are giving a persuasive if you're giving a persuasive speech, your thesis may take the form of a question. So when you introduce the whole topic, instead of saying, jazz is great and everyone should listen to it, you might ask the question, is jazz a form of music that is good for the heart and mind of people? Okay, so now when you ask a question and you don't quite give away your point too soon, then it draws in people from both sides. And so sometimes your thesis in the introduction begins as a question and you lead people to the answer that you want them to have. And your thesis statement should be a part of the first few minutes or so. In a general platform speech, you have approximately 10 minutes, and you don't want to get too far in with some kind of story or some information because the listener will not have a sense of where are you going with this. So that's going to be a key element there of your introduction. And you will recapitulate. The word capit, as those of you who study Latin, means head. So you recapitulate, you go back to the head, you go back to the top, the beginning, and then you restate that thesis. If you said it as a question in the beginning, then you would make it as an assertion, as a strong, confident statement of belief at the end. So thinking a little bit about how you're going to form that thesis statement. Will it be something that you can communicate in a short, clear period of time? And yes, there is a piano behind me because we here at IEW love music. All right. The last thing about your thesis statement is you want it to be memorable. You have to remember your audience now. They're listening to 6, 7, maybe 8 people give 10-minute speeches in one period of time. So that's going very, very quickly by. The more memorable your thesis statement is, the more likely when they go through their ballots and try to put them in order, who's going to be first, who's going to be second, who's going to be third, they're more likely to say, oh yeah, I remember that. That was clear. People like things that are clear. So if you can make your thesis statement something that would be easy to remember, easy to reflect on, then that's going to be a plus. The next idea from the ballot is discusses the topic using appropriate analysis and reasoning. Well, let's take a look at those two words, analysis and reasoning. Analysis is breaking something into its component parts. So if you were trying to talk about jazz, what would be some of the parts of jazz that you could talk about? You could talk about melodic patterns, kind of rhythmic structures. You could talk about the physiological effects of it. That would be one way you could go. You could also divide jazz into, older traditional jazz, kind of currently popular jazz, and then you could talk about the greatest jazz. So you could divide it up that way. If you were talking about why people should not listen to jazz music, then you could talk about, how it's unpredictable and kind of unnerving and disordering. You could then also talk about, the history of it, that it's, basically derived from certain cultural aspects that may not be good. And you could talk about alternatives, So you could go either way for or against something, but that initial step of breaking it into component parts, that's the most important thing to first do, because that's your task of division. So if you look at, you want people to do something, you would look at causes, effects. You could look at the 3 ways to accomplish something, etc. Your reasoning, of course, is using logic, which would be if-then statements and premises and then conclusions. I hope that all of you are engaged in the study of logic, meaning you have a book in your possession that has the word logic on the cover, and you are studying to understand what is a syllogism, what are enthymemes, how are logical statements valid or not valid, what are some of the basic fallacies. This, if you get into speech and debate, having a good study of logic under your belt is probably the most valuable thing you can take into the content area of your speech and debate, especially when you get into policy or values debate. Being able to do cross-examination using the tools of logic, very, very significant. There are different ways that you can organize your contents, and I think through the rest of these sessions, you're going to be touching on these in various ways as well. One is to say, okay, jazz, here's the pros, here's the con, here's the impact, therefore you should or should not listen to jazz. You could also go in chronological order. I don't know that jazz does particularly lend itself toward a chronological ordering, but certain things would. If you're talking about why people should get involved in a certain activity, then you could look at the history of it, the current circumstances, and then what's the future. If you do get involved, things are better. If you don't get involved, things are worse. So chronological order, a proposition, and then proofs. So everyone should eat garlic every day. There's my proposition. Now, how do I get into the proofs of that? You also, in that process, might anticipate objections. So I'm going to have a thesis that everyone should eat a lot of garlic every day. Number one, because it strengthens the immune system. Number two, because it makes your food delicious. And number three, because it assists you with social distancing. Now, some people might say, well, some people don't like garlic. Okay, how do you deal with that fact? I don't understand that myself, but I have heard that some people don't like the taste of garlic. Okay, well then what are some options to that? Well, there's granulated garlic in capsule form there. Or some people say, well, it might give you bad breath. And then you just turn it around and say, yes, but we're not supposed to get closer than 6 feet to anyone. So it's actually helping with all of that right now during our COVID time. So proposition and proofs. And then the last one would be a compare and a contrast and a call to action. So, there's jazz. What can you compare that with, right? And so let's compare jazz to Baroque music and look at structural similarities and differences, look at the effect on people, look at the scientific effect on your mind and physiology, and then you make a call to action. Avoid jazz, listen to Baroque, or listen to Baroque and jazz equally, or don't waste your time with Baroque. Jazz is where it's at. So you can probably come up with that use of comparing two things to strengthen your argument, your call to action for something. Now, these are just possible content formats. These are not the only content formats that you could come up with. So don't hesitate to look at some others, which I think you will have a chance to do. And at the end here, I'm going to strongly encourage you to study excellent speeches that other people have done, taking notes, making outlines, analyzing them. Okay, moving on with the ballot. Incorporates a strong introduction and conclusion, demonstrates a logical, coherent, well-reasoned flow of ideas. Okay, that's one category. Basically, it's just saying, have a good speech. An introduction would start with a hook. You want to state the theme and thesis, and also be sure that you make clear your main assertion so the listener knows where you're going. Then, of course, you want to give people a roadmap. In classical rhetoric, this is called enumeration, where you would say, okay, I'm going to suggest that you eat garlic for 3 reasons. The first reason is, the second reason is, and the third reason is, and then people know what to expect. When people are judging speeches, they really appreciate a clear enumeration, a good roadmap. What am I going to hear? Because that helps them when they're taking notes. That helps them know if you accomplished what you were trying to accomplish. And so that is a very, very important part. Then, of course, your content, that's the bulk of your speech. That's where you're going to take a look at, am I going to do this compare and contrast? Am I going to do this analysis? Am I going to use 3 reasons argument? What's your structure? What's your points? What are your divisions, essentially? And then you strengthen those divisions with your evidence and your examples that can be drawn from real life, sometimes even from literature, often from your own personal experience works best. And I think your next session is going to be about storytelling. So that's where you're going to incorporate some. And then in your conclusion, you may reflect your introductory hook. If you say, start with a little a little scene or a picture, you might repeat that little scene or picture, add to it at the end. If you start a story, you might finish a story. If you use a bit of humor at the beginning, you might use a bit of humor at the end. You restate your thesis, but you want to avoid redundancy. Natasha has asked you a good question. I just happened to see, what is the difference between thesis and assertion? The thesis would kind of be the position you hold, and the assertion would be a stronger statement about what to do with that position. So again, a thesis could be jazz is good music to listen to. Your assertion is we need to listen to more jazz. Likewise, your thesis might be jazz is not worthwhile or helpful in any way. Your assertion is we need to eliminate jazz from our environment. Does that make sense? I hope so. All right, now there are some ideas for you getting what is called a hook into your platform speech. You can use a quotation, ask people a question. I very often do that. I'll start a talk by asking people a question. How many of you have children who don't like writing? You know, and immediately get that audience participation. Little personal anecdote, part of a story, some kind of surprising or provocative statistic, using humor or some kind of dramatic effect, present a problem. Here's the situation in the world right now. Now, what are we going to do about that? Some people I've even seen start with a little song or a poem they wrote. That would be a little awkward in a professional setting, but it can be very effective in a NCFCA competition. And then a mystery. You describe something or someone without actually naming them, and then people are waiting. Who is that? Who is that? I've seen this done effectively in biographical narratives quite well. The next thing on the ballot is balances the development of each point, incorporates fluid transitions. So this really means two things. One is that your divisions, the areas you're discussing, should be approximately equal in length and importance. So garlic is the best way to strengthen your immune system. Everyone should eat garlic. Now, what are my three divisions? It stimulates immune response in such and such a way. I described that. It has certain chemicals that are very advantageous to the building of white blood cells. It makes your food taste better, so you enjoy life more. And then what was my last one? Yes, it aids with social distancing. So those three topics. Now you're going to explore each of those in more detail, but you want them to be approximately equal. And then you want to get a hang of using transitions between your ideas. What I would suggest is listen to some winning speeches, and when you hear a good transitional section, try to just write those words down and make yourself a little list. It may or may not include the things you see here in the first place. In other words, to put it differently, in contrast, additionally, although, but, those are a few, but build yourself up a little repertoire of transitional words and phrases in this way. Now, there's a couple differences between writing an essay and writing a speech. First one is, writing an essay, you're usually shooting for a target number of words, pages, or paragraphs, whereas writing a speech, you're looking for a target number of minutes. Second thing is, you want to outline. In a speech, definitely you want to outline. Don't attempt to write a speech without an outline. You run the danger of rambling and having to rewrite, and it's very, very different. So writing an essay is more formal, less conversational. Writing a speech is going to be more conversational. So in an essay, you never want to write, I would like to tell you about blah, blah, blah. In a speech, you might do that to create a relationship, with the listener that's a little more personal, a little more connected. In an essay, your enumeration is kind of subtle. You subtly work in your topics into an introduction. When writing a speech, you want your roadmap to be very, very clear. So those are a few. You want to be careful with repetition in an essay, whereas in a speech, you can actually use repetition effectively. If you study some of the great speeches of history, you'll notice the use of repetition. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. He says that 7 times in his speech. So repetition can be more effective in speeches. In writing an essay, you want to use very standard grammar and punctuation, whereas in writing a speech, you want your grammar and punctuation to assist you with a better delivery. So those are a few differences. Of course, either essays or speeches, you want to write and rewrite. You want to be willing to go the extra mile, rewrite it a 7th time, and polish to perfection. A little bit of math. If you're trying to figure out how much to write in terms of a speech, you would say, okay, how many words do you speak in a minute, right? And you can read a story conversationally to someone to see how many words did you speak in a minute. Then you would multiply that times the number of minutes, and now you know how many words to write. You do want to consider the fact that when you are speaking, sometimes if you are nervous, you talk faster. Or sometimes you forget something, you go a little slower. Sometimes you want to make a dramatic pause. So you kind of have to practice this a few times to get the hang of it. But once you know your number of words per minute, you can do it. Now, in my case, I speak about 170 words per minute. I've tested this out. So if I want to do a 10-minute speech, I need to plan to write a speech that is about 1,700 words. I would then divide that 1,700 by my number average of words per paragraph. And that's what I know from my essay writing. I would then calculate that to realize I need to have approximately 12 paragraphs. So how do I divide that up? My introduction and opening hook statement story, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs at the most. Roadmap, quickly, 1 paragraph. That's not, maybe even not take a whole paragraph. Then I've got somewhere between 6 and 9 paragraphs. That would be 2 or 3 per 3 points if you're doing 3 points, or 2 times 4 if you're making 4 points, or 3 or 4 times 2 if you're making 2 main points, and then saving 1 or 2 paragraphs for your conclusion. So when you're writing your speech, you can do a little math there to help figure out, because really length dictates structure. How to begin and prepare yourself to begin. First, go through those exercises and activities that Zach described in the previous session on finding your voice, getting your topic, doing the brain dump, doing kind of the, brainstorming exercises, mind map, if you will, whatever tools work for you. I strongly listen. I cannot stress this enough. You need to go to YouTube and you need to look at and listen carefully and outline while you're listening top winning speeches from past years. This is the absolute best way for you to understand various structures, various options to do many of the things that I've been talking about. And that is, if you want to do well in competition, you look at the people who went to nationals and won and the circle of champions, and you figure out how did they do that. And then you use that as a guideline for yourself. Determine your purpose, edify or illuminate, motivate or convert people. Write several versions of your thesis statement, bounce them off your parents, other people. Identify your main assertion, list your analysis supporting points, and then of course you dig into the research. You figure out, okay, what do I need in terms of factual information and data? What quotations can I use to support this? You've got to have your citations so that you always, if you're quoting somebody, you have handy who you're going to be quoting. And then also adding in personal experience as well, where you don't have to do the research, but you do have to do the recall and organization of that. Create a nice outline, remembering that length dictates structure, and then talk through your outline. This is something a lot of people don't think of doing, but try to talk through your outline with, friends, with siblings, with parents, because as you do that, you start to see, oh, I need a little more information here. Oh, I need a little support here. Oh, I need to make that clearer. Oh, I see how I can make a smoother transition between these topics. And so talk it through many times before you take the time to write it out. And then when you write it out, everything will go better. Absolutely, everything will go better. The 5 canons of rhetoric: what to say, invention. 2, arrangement, ordering your ideas. 3, elocution, how to say that. Memory, how to memorize your speech. And delivery, how to do a good delivery. These are the things that all successful public speakers have learned and studied, whether they knew it or not. So far today, you've talked about what to say in the first session, and we've talked a little bit here about ordering your ideas. So as you go through this course, and if you choose to participate in subsequent courses offered, then you will get more into the how to say things, how to tell the stories. And of course, memory techniques are very useful because you do have to memorize a speech. You get penalized if you read from a script. And there are some wonderful techniques you can use to roadmap the speech in your brain so you don't forget stuff. And then of course, delivery is all that public speaking, eye contact, gestures, body movements, voice modulation. So I think you're going to get a lot of great instruction in those areas. Last thing I'll point out is this is the classical idea of rhetoric modes of persuasion. Ethos is the credibility. Who is speaking? Is this a trustworthy person? Do they come across well? Do they have, a background or a level of experience that immediately leads you to be more easily persuaded by them? Logos is the truth. Here's your logic and your analysis and your facts and your reasoning. Is that solid? If it isn't, then you don't have success. You may have looked at a few political campaigns where you notice that the candidate seems a little lacking in credibility, or the candidate seems a little bit lacking in logic, and that doesn't win elections there. Pathos probably, at least in politics, is the one that people are most affected by. I feel your pain kind of idea. But how can you evoke emotion? Usually with a good story. That is the best way to get people to either laugh or cry. And if you've got people in your audience either laughing or crying, you know you're on the path to having completed a successful speech. All right, we can do some questions now. We have to do the raffle. I think we're maybe a few minutes behind, but we've got to do the raffle. And I just wanted to let you all know that we have some resources available. If you would like to hear a talk that I have done on humor in teaching and speaking, it goes over 10 different types of humor and how you can construct or find humorous situations and jokes and stories. Just go to our website, iew.com/humor, and you can get that talk. I think it's $3, I'm not sure. And then we have, of course, the new video of me teaching high school kids. It's structured and style for students level C. You can take a look at that. And then we're very happy to have partnered with NCFCA for the comprehensive guides there. Mm-hmm. All right, so I will go off screen share now and turn it over to you, Amy Joy.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So we're going to invite our Director of Marketing, Mrs. Natalia Rosa, onto the screen, and she has a fantastic giveaway for you today.
Hello, friends. We do have a fantastic giveaway. First, a brief reminder, if you're interested in the curriculum that NCFCA has published in partnership with IEW, you can check out those resources at ncfca.org/resources/curriculum. And we also are right now running our preseason affiliation discount, so you can receive $50 off the regular affiliation pricing. I know there have been many questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. I see more coming in now related to what is NCFCA competition? How do you compete? What are the rules? What is affiliation? What are regions? Rest assured, if you have questions specific to NCFCA, we will answer those questions. We're actually going to have a special Q&A session available on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 4 p.m. Central Time. So it will follow the final session of each of those days, and we will limit that Q&A time to NCFCA specific questions. So please plan to attend if you have questions about NCFCA. Our giveaway for this session is your choice of the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech, Policy Debate, or Value Debate. If you've attended this session, I'm going to guess that you're interested in learning about speech, but I also want to point out that Andrew spoke about the importance of learning logic. And our value debate curriculum actually has an entire portion that's dedicated to learning those logic skills. So that might be a great fit for you as well. Our giveaway winner for this presentation is Melinda Spees. So Melinda, if you could send me an email at summittech@ncfca.org, or send me your name and email address directly in the chat here. You can send it to Natalia Rosa or to all the panelists. We'll make sure that you receive your giveaway prize. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Amy Joy and Andrew.
That's great. Well, Andrew, I'm sure you know this, but you're kind of famous. So we
In
received
small circles, yeah.
we received quite a few personal questions. I'd love to just cover a couple of these because I think they're great questions. What inspired you to become an English teacher?
I wasn't making enough money as a music teacher. So I taught violin, Suzuki violin and kinder music full time. I mean, I had 73 students and 10 kinder music classes. I was working every available hour there was, and I still wasn't able to, you know, keep my wife home to homeschool kids and get ahead. And so I got the idea of doing a seminar, and I just kind of really stumbled into it. And then after a few years, it was getting to be pretty successful because the system works so well. And I gave up teaching music and got into running around doing seminars and making videos. But, you know, that's the personal answer. Probably the bigger answer is God called me to it and kind of tricked me into doing it. And then, you know, I really feel very much on mission for, you know, doing his work in the way that I do.
That's great. So how long have you been teaching IEW?
I started, did my very first seminar in 1994, so around 25 years, and then I went full-time in the year 2000. So I've been at it full-time for 20.
That's great. And if we have audience members who are interested in becoming certified in IEW, whom should they contact?
Well, we have our teacher training course, Teaching Writing Structure and Style, and if you go to IEW.com/IC for instructor certification, those details are available as well as an email specific to that question.
Okay, now the more pressing questions. Do you play the piano that's behind you?
Very, in a very rudimentary way. My mother was a piano teacher, so I grew up surrounded by it. But I took up the violin, I guess, just to be different. And I never really did play the piano much. However, it is a skill I wish I had learned. And what I'd really like to do if I have like eternity is learn the organ. So if I, you know, if they say in heaven, what would you like to do that you've always wanted to and didn't have time, now that you have a really long time? I would say play the organ. I think that's the most magnificent of all instruments.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's move into some questions specifically about thesis statements. So one of our viewers asks, could a thesis statement be used as a slogan, and does a slogan make a good thesis statement?
I suppose in a few cases that would be possible, but when we think of slogans, we think of things that are not just easy to remember, but a little bit simple. You think of a slogan as something that just anybody, regardless of intellect and education, would get. And so I think you run the risk of a slogan kind of dumbing down your thesis statement. But I do believe there could be some exceptions to that, because simple isn't necessarily bad. So I wouldn't say yes or no to that. I think you just have to evaluate your idea, and don't operate in a vacuum. You have help. You've got your coaches. You've got, you know, other people in your club if you're in a club. You've got other friends. You've got parents. You've got siblings. You've got grandparents. You've got maybe aunts, uncles, cousins. You use those people and say, hey, I'm thinking about this as an idea for a speech. What do you think of it? And then run some of these ideas and poll people. You know, one of the problems is that judges are different. Some judges really like a roadmap, right? that if you don't do that, you're marked down on organization. Other judges like too formulaic, be careful you don't follow, a plan that's too obvious. Okay, well, you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. But the best way, I think, for you to figure out what works is to try out ideas on a variety of people that you have in your world before you take the speech into competition.
It's fantastic. Andrew, we happen to have our intensive speech team lead with us, and I just asked him if he wouldn't be willing to join us for a moment, because we do have an intensive session that's going to talk a lot about using a mantra. So Zach, if you would, we'd love to have you join us. Can you just comment a little bit on what that session is going to be about in the intensive?
Sure, yeah, just super briefly. Slogans are awesome, and every speech should have something along the lines of a slogan. And what I typically call it when I teach it is the mantra. So we're going to have a whole session in the intensive section of this this experience, where I will go into detail about how you create a mantra, which is what people are going to walk away with and be able to repeat over and over again, and then tie it to your thesis. Remember the rest of what you talked about because you had something really catchy that they can relate to and remember. So mantras are really important. Slogans are important. And I'm going to be talking all about that.
So Zach, just to clarify, you would have a thesis statement and a slogan, or and a mantra.
Yeah, I would have a thesis statement, then I would have a theme, which is a really shortened version of my thesis statement. Then I'm going to have a word picture. Then I'm going to build my mantra off of my word picture. So there's a way to structure that. And then you incorporate your slogan or your mantra in every single point you make. That's something you repeat over and over again, because that's what the audience is going to walk away with remembering.
That's great. Okay, so either one of you, let's talk more about this thesis statement. Sometimes we have judges who really don't want the thesis statement to be so obvious. And so this question is about balancing, should we disguise the thesis statement, or is it important to just say it in a memorable and powerful way?
Zach,
Andrew?
you first. You competed. I've only done professional stuff that's very different in a way.
Yeah, I was going to let you go, but yeah, sure. I'll make a jab at it. Speech, here's how I guess I would describe it. When I write a paper, it is always going to have a very clear thesis statement at the beginning, every time. Speech is like this combination of papers and music. You need it to flow because your audience has this auditory side to you speaking publicly. And so some of my speeches will have a very clear thesis statement at the very beginning. And other speeches, to be honest, I've done some speeches successfully where I don't really give my full thesis till the very end, as more like just surprise. We built up to this point and here's what it is. But I'll let you continue off of that. It's up to you.
My experience in professional speaking is, you have a title generally of a talk, which you don't necessarily have in your competitive speech. Your title is whatever you say first. That's what people are going to write down in terms of their idea of your title. But I do like the idea of starting with a question and then gradually moving people through the evidence and examples and stories that you put in to the conclusion you want them to have. So if I'm talking about why you should read out loud to your children in huge quantity for many years, I don't start with that statement. I ask the question, where do children get their language from? Do they get it from school? Do they get it from peers? Do they get it from media? Do they get it from books? What are the main sources? And lead people to where I want them to go. So I tend to favor that when I'm judging speeches. I kind of like that just because I know that it works for me. But I don't count anyone down if they don't do it exactly the way I might do it.
I think that's really important, Andrew. You were talking about earlier, there are lots of different types of judges. So for your more analytical judges, they really do like a clear thesis. They really do want a roadmap to know where they're going. So I think you have to try it out. And I would encourage you as you're writing speeches to perform it in front of a lot of different people that are your age, people that are your parents' age, people that are your grandparents' age, and ask for feedback and see what the greatest majority of the folks say. So let's go on here. Andrew, I'm going to direct this one to you. Is it possible to use 2 or 3 formats while writing a speech, or does that just make it too complicated? So you presented those different structures in the beginning. I think what we're asking here is there ever a time to mix and match or to combine those?
I think you could definitely have a hybrid of those. And I would reiterate, if you want to learn how to do any of those and others that were not listed on that slide, you need to go listen to some of the top competitors, such as Zach or Natasha, or, you know, there's such a plethora of great speeches available on YouTube that you would be foolish to try and undertake this, you know, especially if it's your first year, without really studying what have those top level competitors done. And that gives you the repertoire of, you know, models, and even a repertoire of like the wording, particularly, you know, the smooth transitions that they do, the type of story they're going to tell, and the way they end. And that's just not something you can learn by reading a bunch of principles about how to do it. You learn it by example. And the great thing is, when I got involved in speech and debate, there was hardly an internet at all, and there was no way you could go and listen to 10 top level competitors giving persuasive speeches to learn how to do that better. You had to go to the tournament and sit there and watch and try to take notes. But now you've got so much more in the way of resources.
That's great. Zach, how can a listener make a very serious topic more conversational? So we really approach that in the NCFCA. We want our communication style to be able to reach a wide audience. But if your topic is really serious, how would you suggest doing that?
I mean, hearkening back to the first session where I talk about building your own personal connection to your speech topic, to your story, to what you're talking about, that is how you build the relationship element between you and your audience. So your audience is, like I said in the first session, always asking the question, why is this subject important to you? And if you can't answer that question, then it's hard to relate to your audience. I mean, that's what we do in conversation all the time with one-on-one people. We talk about a subject. Why is it important to you? Why is it important to them? What do we each think about it? So adding that conversational element into your speech is what brings it down to earth. It doesn't always have to be super funny. It can be deep and be powerful, and that's fine, as long as you can draw that personal connection to it, and the judge can answer the question in their head when they're watching you. This person connects because of this.
That's great. And Andrew, how can we make the points more equal in length if one is really important and the other two are less important? Is it better just to remove that point, or how would you suggest getting it so it's a little bit more even?
Well, I personally wouldn't put a huge amount of weight on that idea of balanced, but you can sometimes attach something to it. So you have a point that's maybe not as important, but you've got this little story to illustrate. Whereas your third point is going to be your big guns reason, your big guns evidence, whatever. And so, you know, balancing those is an ideal, but I don't think it's a rule that you would have to, you know, slavishly follow in order to do well. It's just when a judge looks at their notes and they maybe have 3 columns and they've got these 3 reasons as to why you should get more involved in something. And the first column has just a few things, and then the third column has a whole bunch of things. That's their seeing, well, that wasn't terribly balanced. So, and some of the judges take those ballots very literally too.
Right.
So you just try to, I think, beef it up, with some kind of illustration that is, and maybe that's the point, to add some humor. Yes. Whereas your third point, that's the big gun serious thing, and where you're presenting, the strong reasons. So that's hard to say. But I don't think you want to look at that as a killer of your plan. Yes. If that's what you really want to do. If I'm talking about garlic, the stupid idea that it promotes social distancing is probably my least effective reason. And it is also the one that lends itself to humor, but there's no real evidence. Mm-hmm. My point about garlic building your immune system, I mean, you could write a whole book about that. So there's lots of evidence. So.
Great. Let's talk just a little bit about speech writing and how you kind of enhance that basic structure. So this question asks, is alliteration or any other literary device good to add in a speech, or is that more appropriate for an essay?
Well, any rhetorical device, whether it's alliteration or simile or metaphor or onomatopoeia or any kind of parallel construction, it works well as long as it doesn't sound contrived. So if you can do alliteration and it sounds exactly like that's what I wanted to say anyway, and oh, it just happened that those words had the same starting sound, that's going to be effective. If you twist something and you use it just to say, haha, look, I did this simile, it's obviously a simile I tried to contrive, that's ineffective. If you use alliteration that looks contrived, it's just worse than not trying at all. So that's the skill of the great redders, is to be able to work the devices in as if that was exactly what you wanted to say anyway. And it just so happened to be beautiful.
That's great. Zach, did you find that to be true when you were competing?
Yeah, definitely. I would very much try to make it natural, of course, but I would try to find ways to add metaphors, alliterations, things into my speech. That's what makes it memorable. It is memorable. It is a performance to a certain extent, but it's trying to make a performance seem like you're just doing it off the top of your head because you don't want it to sound canned.
So if you had a student who is unfamiliar with these literary devices, where would you guide them? How can they learn more about that aspect?
Well, I would suggest our Structure and Style for Students Level C program, for one. We teach that in the context of writing. There are some, good books on public speaking that will have sections on rhetorical devices. And I guess, again, I would go to the best. I would listen to speeches by Ronald Reagan. I would listen to speeches by Winston Churchill. Churchill was such a master of the English language, and you see how he does it and you say, okay, well, that was in that subject in that way. I could kind of imitate that and do that similar use of words for what I want to say. We really learn best through imitation. So yes, it can be explained, but it cannot be learned internally without imitation, which means have a great example and then try to do something like that and keep doing it for years.
Okay, very, very important last question here. Do you pronounce your words so well because of giving speeches?
I am impressed that someone thought I pronounced my words well. I was really blasting through this PowerPoint so I could stay on your schedule. But I do have a habit as a teacher of being aware that people need to understand what I say. I also lived in Japan for 3 years and learned Japanese and taught English. And that was very formative on my speaking patterns because I had to be sure that I was making it as clear and simple as possible for the Japanese people as I was teaching English. So
and that is an important part of communication, is being able to articulate and make sure that that audience can understand what you're saying. So Andrew, I just want to thank you for being here with us today. It's such a privilege to work with you. And Zach, thanks for joining in from the competitors and the alumni perspective. Appreciate both of you very well.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy. There's just so many good questions we didn't get to. I guess we'll just hope that in the presentations that follow, some of those will be addressed. And, I have had the great privilege of working with the NCFCA to publish the Complete Guide to Speech. And it's just packed. It is just full of many of the answers to these questions. So anyone out there who is seriously looking at going into competition this year, I cannot recommend that curriculum highly enough. Otherwise, I just thank you all for taking the time and wish you good luck.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, thank you to you, our viewers. We're so glad that you're here with us. I want to encourage you to come back at 3 o'clock when Paige Sensman will be sharing with us on the building blocks of effective storytelling. Then tomorrow, we'll be covering limited preparation speeches. On Wednesday, interpretation speeches. And then on Thursday and Friday, we'll move into debate. So This is our opportunity to build a really firm foundation. If you like what you're seeing here, we want to invite you back for our online intensive on August 3rd through the 7th. We will have separate tracks for policy debate, value debate, and speech. And that teaching will include live teaching with breakout activities where you'll actually be working in a small group with a live coach. So there are very limited spots available for that event. So if you're interested, please visit ncfca.org/intensive. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you back at 3 p.m. Central Time.